It really gives me a lot of pleasure to host Malcolm McCullough, who is a professor of architecture at my alma mater at the Taubman College, University of Michigan, where he teaches design studios and courses in network cities. Previously, he served on the faculty of Carnegie Mellon from 1998 to 2000, and for 10 years from 1988 to 1998 at Harvard. Earlier, he was a pioneer of architectural computing at Autodesk from 1984 to 1986. He remained widely read writer on digital design culture. McCullough's most recent book, called Downtime on the Microgrid, 2020, provides a cultural read on architecture's electrification. His previous book, Ambient Commons, 2013, introduced information environmentalism. Digital Ground, a book he published in 2004, became a key crossover between architecture and interaction design. And Abstracting Craft in 1996, which I have to admit is my favorite book, and I have it near me all the time. It remains an early cult classic in digital work practices. And Digital Design Media from 1991, that will probably date me quite a bit. Because this is one of the first books I used in my teaching with Bill Mitchell, the late Bill Mitchell, who was the dean of the School of Architecture at MIT, was a pioneering textbook that remained in print for nearly 20 years and in 5 languages. And in our area that is so fast paced, by the way, for a book to remain in print for 20 years is quite impressive. One thing I will tell you, I will deviate a little bit and tell you, because if you notice the bookmark that I have here on that page is a discussion of non-manifold topology, which actually inspired the work that we are doing right now with Topologic. This is back in 1996 or 1991, excuse me. On the basis of these writings, McCullough has given nearly 50 invited talks in over a dozen countries. Currently, he is at work on launching a new degree program in urban technology. We welcome you to our school, Malcolm. I know that this is a different format than the usual invited talk, which we have discussed. So Malcolm is not going to be lecturing and showing slides. He's actually going to be answering questions. So what I would ask the audience to do is to really prepare questions for Malcolm, and we will, you will raise your hand or put them in the Q&A if you want. I will read them and we'll kick it off from there, and we'll expand on these topics. I have prepared a few questions myself, that's just to get things started, but I really would like to hear, and I think Malcolm would like to hear from the group.
Please just drop questions in the chat. And Wasim, maybe your mic is very directional. Sometimes I can hear you very little, and sometimes it's okay.
All right, sorry, apologies.
We have in our college, we have experimented with and generally gone over to this format of conversations rather than presentations, because people have been on Zoom so much, and the last thing they need is to see one more slide deck. Our dean, Jonathan Massey, has interviewed, for example, the mayor of Los Angeles and the architecture critic of the New York Times using this format. We are not those people.
But so what I will do, I think we keep it informal rather than raising hands and asking questions, etc. I think it's a small enough group that we can simply type the questions into the chat window. So I will start a little bit and then just kind of give you a bit of chance to collect your thoughts, and just go ahead and type them into the chat window, and I will read them again and have Malcolm kind of respond to those. And if we need to have a bit of a conversation, I can promote you to a panelist and have a more interactive format.
And audience, please understand that Wasim and I did trade a few questions, very good questions, I should say. Maybe we'll get through all of those. Maybe it'll open up. However, we have plenty to talk about.
Sure. So I will start not so much with a question, but just a quick request for those of you who are not familiar with Malcolm, to tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you start your career? Tell us a bit about your trajectory, and how did you end up at Michigan?
Well, it's very flattering that you would ask this. I don't often get asked that. and it's nice to think about. Retrospect is okay. I'm hitting the age of 65 next year, and I can wander off into the forest then. I got started as an architect and was working as a young architect in Boston. I noticed that all of the clients who came back and said, "Can you do more?" They were, which is not what clients usually say, right? We're all tech firms on Route 128, and we started learning about them, and I became very interested in how that was going. In my native city of Pittsburgh, I went prowling around Carnegie Mellon, which is a place I ended up happily on the faculty later, and my son's an undergraduate there right this moment. And I met a man named Chuck Eastman, a name you probably know. And he said, "Oh, well, here are the people." And one of those was Bill Mitchell. And I moved to California for other reasons. And then went and found Bill Mitchell. I was a starving young designer like anyone else. And I came in out of the desert, literally, which he loved because he was from the Australian outback, and had all these questions about this book he'd written. Bill Mitchell had a book, Computer-Aided Architectural Design, in 1977. Bill was chair of architecture at UCLA at age 33. He's a bright guy. And in many ways, that was the beginning of everything. Bill and I worked for a long, long time together. I would not be here without that. But then also somehow, and not Bill's doing at all, somehow I also spent my summers in Northern California because Los Angeles was always difficult for me. And in Northern California, I can't even tell you how, but somehow I got hooked up with this little startup company, Autodesk. And I really should have $1 gazillion. I should be very, very wealthy, and I am not. All you had to do was reach out and grab. I don't know if any of you spent any time in Silicon Valley, but you're not allowed to blink. And I don't think I was a good enough coder to stay, so I didn't stay very long, a couple years, and that's where I started hearing conversations about non-manifold topologies, right? Although you know what a personal computer was like. They had these things called personal computers. Isn't that quaint? The idea that you owned your data and that your computer was your thing and was not on the internet hardly ever. In fact, I don't think computers were on the internet hardly at all in the 80s. They had this thing called CompuServe. Oh my God. So that's how it got started.
Great. Yeah, so you kind of answered a little bit my next question about working with Bill Mitchell. I mean, obviously, Bill was considered really the oracle of computational methods in architecture. He had an uncanny ability to see patterns around him, see developments, and kind of do predictions. And in a way, just because everybody really was listening to his predictions, in a way, he was inventing the future. So even if the prediction was not about to come true, people would take those ideas and say, we should be working on that. You know, Bill Mitchell talked about this. I remember in 2001, his keynote speech at the conference at Acadia that I hosted. He was our keynote speaker. Again, it was exactly that kind of looking at the future of computer-aided design. So I was just wondering, how was it working with him in that respect? And what are some of the things that you saw him and you kind of predicting about the future in our area, and what came true and what did not come true?
Without question, Bill Mitchell is one of the smartest people I ever met. So too, also John Walker, the founder of Autodesk from the backwoods of West Virginia. Now, there's one of the smartest people I ever met. Oh my God. But Bill also had the sensibilities of a radio commentator or a historian or a literary critic. He could have been any of those. If you spend any time around historians, one thing they like to say is, why know history? Well, in order to expand the time of which you consider yourself a part. So in many ways, he could see himself in time, and he could see things in time the way I'm told that Wayne Gretzky could see the ice in a hockey game. And he therefore had an absolutely extraordinary sense of timing. He was a master of what to try when. Mm-hmm. I am not that. I have been too early and too late to any number of parties in my life. But Bill had a great sense of timing, and he also had an uncanny ability to get really smart people to work really hard in ways that benefited both themselves and his collective project. So he was a good mentor, and he was also a very good aggregator of talents. Yeah. His basic modus operandi was catch me if you can. Absolutely. He really moved right out.
Yeah. I mean, he obviously also inspired a whole new generation. I mean, I obviously, worked with and met many of the students of Bill Mitchell. They call themselves with an unfortunate moniker, the SOBs, basically the students of Bill.
I can hardly hear you. I can hardly
sorry.
hear you.
I'm saying I met a lot of the students of Bill Mitchell. Like Branko Kolarek, like Nancy Chang, who we invited recently.
He had one of his people everywhere.
Yeah.
And some other person like that would be, a mafia don, and he was not that. Cool. He was a shrinking violet by personality, and not looking for the limelight at all.
That's it.
I'm not going to name names, but you can contrast that with some others.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm gonna pause here because I don't want to run through all my questions all at once.
Now I can hear you.
Good. I'll try speaking closer to this microphone. This is this new. Hold on one sec. Here we go. Right. Okay. So it was a bit dodgy, this microphone. Can you hear me well now?
That's good.
Okay. All right. So I will turn to the audience, and I'm actually wondering whether I can put Chris on the spot, since you guys know each other, and maybe you can tell us how you know each other, and if Chris has a question for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Wasim. Well, I haven't seen Malcolm in 20 years, and it's a real pleasure to see him. He's hardly
changed. Is it that long?
Yeah, he's hardly changed. And I met Malcolm when he was a visiting chair at Carnegie Mellon. And I think, Malcolm, you were there for maybe 3 years or something. And I was there for about 6 months. And I think just at the end of my my visit, I think at that point you went off to Michigan. I seem to remember having a conversation with you, and not to get so you were still living in Pittsburgh, but you were working in Michigan, which is, I guess, is fairly normal in the States.
Yes, especially once you have two people in the family.
Yeah, exactly. So I was, like Wasim, I was hugely impressed by your writing at that time. I came fairly late to it, and but I liked that your humanistic approach to technology, which really lined up with a lot of the things I was interested in at that time. I don't really have a question for you, because I've kind of left the digital scene quite far behind. Although I guess given that you're starting up a new course on urban technology, I would be interested to hear what you have to say about this highly commercialized push on smart cities that we see going on around us. And also, I don't know if you're familiar with, is it Adam Greenfield's kind of
yes.
His reaction to that? So I'd be very keen to hear what your take on that is.
Indeed. We might want to save that for later in the conversation, because I know there are a lot of people here doing doctoral work in design computation. But just a short trace. And Wasim, I think this begins to answer one of your other questions, which was what was the prompt to move away from what today is called smart geometry, at least in one conference, right?
Yes.
Mitchell started that too. In the 90s, after he published The Logic of Architecture, which is a really ambitious work. He worked so hard on The Logic of Architecture, and then he went off to be dean at MIT. Then things really changed, and he did City of Bits, Etopia, right, and Me++, the trio of those, in very short order, all in the 1990s. And that was and also he is the one who bankrolled Hiroshi Ishii to do the bits and atoms thing that became the origins of the tangible computing at MIT. Bill's been gone for more than 10 years. I don't know what he would. Oh, and he also is the person who appointed Carlo Ratti, who is one of the louder voices and doesn't mind the limelight on what it now is called urban computing, or smart city is really, as you say, you didn't use these words, but smart city, there's a lot of suits using that expression, right? Wasim, do you want to steer a little bit here? I don't want to jump too far ahead of your agenda.
No worries. Yeah, no worries. I mean, I think wherever the discussion takes us is going to be an interesting area.
I'm sorry, we're both speaking at once.
Sorry, go ahead, Martin.
I thought it might be nice to end on our new degree at Michigan, because I know you, as a Michigan alum, you would like to hear a little bit about our school at some point too.
Absolutely.
But why don't you steer back into some of these middle questions you had?
It makes me proud. So we'll definitely circle back to that, because I would like to hear about it, but perhaps
thank you, Chris,
a bit later. Right. Okay. So I know for a fact that one of my PhD students, Abdurrahman, had a question for you, but I'm trying to see where he is. He might have. Here he is. Yeah. Okay. So Abdul, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi.
And speak up, please, a little bit also.
So, did you hear me now?
I can barely hear you, and I cannot see you. I see your window with just your name in it.
Yeah, I can't open my videos because I need the permission from the host.
Oh, right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, all of us will do that. Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, go ahead and ask your question, and I'll try to see
so it's a really general question about if we divide the history of computational design and the coming of the artificial intelligence. If we say like the modernism in the 1930, and then computational design 1960, and then parametric design close to 1990, and then the artificial intelligence. However, the artificial intelligence and machine learning only available or only be in the theories and in academic research. We didn't see it into a practice a lot. So what do you think needs to move machine learning into a practice?
Thank you for that very interesting set of lead-ups to a question. AI is in many ways the key question today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Many of you may know the work also at Carnegie Mellon of Molly Wright Steenson, whose wonderful book called Architecture's Intelligence traces back to some early considerations of AI and machine learning in the architecture field, even before I got into it. And I've been here since the Mississippian period or the Devonian period, something. I am like a horseshoe crab or a fern. I'm a whole evolutionary holdover from long ago. I would like to say that many of the most interesting conversations that I was ever part of surrounding artificial intelligence occurred in the 1980s in California, not among architects. Back then, the notions of AI seemed boundless and the philosophical questions were deep. In Berkeley, two philosophers, Hubert Dreyfus and John Searle, were the ones to read. The one person with whom I had the most conversations about this back then has remained a friend for life, and went on to be chair of computer science at Berkeley. He's smarter than I am, like I'm smarter than the bus driver. His name is Edward Ashford Lee. And let me actually drop into the chat his, am I able to drop into the chat? Yes, here. He has a book called The Coevolution that I think a number of you might like to see. Pardon my slow typing. The basic argument there is that this is a period of coevolution between humanity and artificial intelligence, that they both still need one another. Neither Edward nor I is one of these people who is sitting around anticipating the singularity. We're not. And yet, Google is the most amazing thing that human beings ever made, and it's eating universities for lunch. Universities are no longer at the top of the knowledge food chain, are they? And that's pretty remarkable. Just in my everyday life, where I feel artificial intelligence working with me most, I think is in Slack. Slack has the most amazing AI. It's just so, it's so usable. AI is being put to use in usability. Even good old Photoshop or clunky old beast of Illustrator, which are such workhorses for our students, they got a lot of AI in them anymore. So it's hard to scroll back to notions where architectural design research in computing was looking for ways to develop machine learning in shape computation. Again, Mitchell's Logic of Architecture book was that one. Yitung Liu, I can't say his right name, Aleppo, who went off to be dean at Taipei. Another one of Bill's people got there early on neural networks. There's some history there. But the notion that some kind of app that is overtly an AI app that would be a primary and proactive designer or collaborator, that's not there yet, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, for us, older generation who have been through a really interesting period where we witnessed some of the early ideas, and they were ideas that were there without the technology to support them. And Bill Mitchell, one of the best advice he gave in his talk to a group of young computational researchers trying to kind of make their way. The advice he gave us was never design for the computer that you have at your desk. I mean, never design for the current technology, because that will be quite limiting. In a way, he said, come up with the ideas, come up with the framework, and let the technology catch up with you. So I think that is a little bit what happened with AI, is that in a lot of the ideas were put together in the 80s and in the 90s. I did my minor when I was doing my PhD. You're supposed to do a major and minor at Michigan. So my minor was with Ed Durfee, who was doing distributed AI. And I went over to the computer science department and struggled with Prolog and struggled with Lisp and struggled with all of these technologies, trying to understand what I could do. And this idea of recognition and kind of simulating, at that point, also simulating cognition was quite a bit. And then all of that, really, I didn't know what to do with it because the technology was not there. And as you said, whether it's Slack or Photoshop or Google, that technology, without even us recognizing it, is all around us. It is, AI is actually with us, not as you said, as an identifiable kind of, here's a piece of software, you train it and all of that. That's what we do in the lab. But for the public, it's on their phone. It's on, it's on their computer. It's everywhere.
It's a long, long way from Lisp. And, we were coding in Lisp at Autodesk too, right? The Autodesk scripting language was Lisp. Although they weren't doing tail recursion. We did some tail recursive Lisp programming around GSD around 1990. It didn't go very far, did it?
Yeah.
How far from that? I've never touched TensorFlow, and I've never done any of this adaptive learning stuff. But yes, there's a question in the chat: is it more than pattern recognition and behavior anticipation? I would say, oh yes, indeed, it is. It's not something I think about all day long. And I deal with a lot of undergrads. What I tell them is that if you don't want to be replaced by a machine, well, don't act like one. But I think that the people that I know who have spent time in Google, and it's not only Google, it's just, and eventually something will come along to be to Google as Google was to Microsoft. I call that Manas, which is Sanskrit for mind. I don't know that I want to be alive that long. And even then, it's probably not a singularity. It seems to be something that just feeds on incomprehensible amounts of data. The thing that I think that's important to understand today is that by far the majority of data on Earth is never witnessed by human eyes.
Yeah.
Human beings are being mined. They are not doing the analysis. And beyond that, I don't have that much else to say about it. Go read Molly, or go read Edward. Go read the coevolution. But I do want to jump onto something specific you said, remembering Bill Mitchell, of figure out what you want to do and let the technology catch up.
Yeah.
Is that how you said it?
Basically, yeah.
Right on. Here's what happened. I think that reversed. And I think it happened in the 90s. And if I had to put a name on somebody who embraced that reversal, let me name Greg Lynn.
Right.
Instead of, here's what we want to do, let the technology catch up. Or instead of, here's what architects know, how do we represent that knowledge? It flipped and became, look at all this amazing stuff that computers do. Let's call that architecture.
Right. No, absolutely.
And there it has remained ever since. I don't know if any of you ever goes to an Acadia conference. I cannot stomach it. I'm sorry, Wasim, I know you've been an Acadia president, but to me,
I have distanced myself for a while.
This notion of, here's the coolest geometry I can generate, let's call that architecture. I have to leave the room.
Sure, absolutely.
I've traveled too much. I'm very sentimental about there being a world outside our head. And I believe that architecture is very circumstantial and contingent and situated. That's just where I'm coming from.
I understood situated, but could you expand a little bit on circumstantial and tangential? What did I missed the first two. Can you expand on what you meant by that?
You'll have to say it to your mic, though. I did not hear.
Oh, sorry. Could you just expand on the description of architecture? I understood situated, but could you expand on your description of what architecture is? I just want to pull on that thread a little bit.
Academics love to debate what architecture is, but generally it's a more useful question to ask what architecture does. Architecture arranges people in space. And architecture represents organizations to their constituencies, right? And architecture persists and lasts longer than particular uses. It was Rossi who explained that the notion of form follows function. That's not the case. Form far outlives function if it's good form. Therefore, our architecture has typological depth and essence. What else? Architecture serves very well to cue and frame and support. And here we cross over into the land of extended mind thesis and embodied cognition. I don't know how many people in the room think about that kind of stuff. And that, of course, is something interaction designers got to sooner than architects.
Yeah,
which is one reason. Because I'm a lucky guy. I got to go to a gazillion interaction design conferences, mostly in the aughts. I was a high air miles guy in the aughts, and I was almost never to rooms full of architects.
Interesting.
I'm just short reading. Version of embodied cognition is that the mind moves more freely and is more in flow without having to have names and rules, much less apps for everything. People, competent people follow rules, and competent people might behave like machines and eventually be replaced by them. But experts play situations. And the famous line, from the famous physicist Richard Feynman in the Genius book, that my papers are not a record of my work, they are my work.
Right.
The props and the cues and the scales and what anthropologists call the boundary objects, all the elements of situation are part of the thinking process. And this is called the extended mind thesis. Embodied cognition explains that a lot of these things, that attention, which of course is the coin of the realm, right? Attention is even more scarce than time. And the more plentiful that information becomes, the more scarce attention is. You know that. A lot of people don't seem to, though, and they're being preyed on. At any rate, embodied cognition points out that not all attention is something that you must pay. How many people say, oh yes, attention, I know, pay attention, we got to pay attention. Well, no. Attention can be effortless, and attention can flow freely in sport or music or dance, or I guess for Wayne Gretzky on the ice and playing hockey, right?
Yeah, I remember in the introduction to my book, Rob Woodbury wrote that in order for you to be to know that you're doing digital design well, is that you are in a joyful flow. That's how he described it. And it's that idea of the ease and flow and joy of doing something, whether it's cooking or crafting a digital object, that you have to be, your attention is almost not needed, as you said. So it's almost there because of that.
It arises from it. So exactly. Now we come to the craft book, and now, so this answers one of your other questions. The craft book arose as a refutation to the then prevalent orthodoxy that the purpose of AI would be to eliminate recourse to human sensibilities. Because under high modernism, or I guess under World War II military-industrial complex, the last thing you wanted was human error. Even as recently as the 80s, there were a lot of people who felt that the role of computers was to get human judgment out of the picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a source of possible error. Yeah.
Whereas the room full of talents that had gathered around Bill Mitchell in the early 90s, and I'm thinking in particular of a guy named Wade Hakoda, who was the greatest of them all, who died young in his 19, he was only 37 years old or something like that. Poor Wade. When Bill got moved to Harvard, he got to bring a couple of his people. I was the second one he brought. Wade was the first. We were craftsmen, and we would say so a lot. And I thought I would write that down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The reason
it was considered, and this gets around to yet another question that was in the set of how do research trends arise and come and go. This gets right at it. It's what science technology society people call technological frames. I'm getting ahead of myself.
No, that's all right.
But just to finish the point,
yes,
the notion, two notions were heretical. One is that work would have intrinsic worth in itself, that people would do work for the state that it would put them in. Mm-hmm. That was heresy. And then it was, well, maybe that's enough right there, but it was also, no, I'll stop there.
That's fine. Let me turn to the question that I see in the chat. First of all, to acknowledge Chris's comment about Prolog. I actually mentioned it because I know that he had worked on the C Prolog interpreter.
I had a Prolog seminar with John Jarrow. I was baffled.
Yes. Oh, it was. I mean, even when I started using Design Script, which was written by Aish and his team for, as the language for Dynamo, Design Script is separated into imperative and declarative, and a lot of that work reminded me of this early work with Prolog, where you declare certain things, and that has an effect.
It looks like from Google and TensorFlow and all that, it looks like nothing's declarative. It's all emergent.
Let me read the question from Zelda. Hi, would you please advise about the future of biology in AI and machine learning? Which aspect of the artificial evolutionary process of design will be the pioneer in your anticipation? What is the next form of relationship between biology and technology in AI? So you can imagine AI is on a lot of people's minds these days.
I'm going to type yet another remark from another one of my favorite philosophies into the chat here. It's short, don't worry. Yogi Berra, the philosopher Yogi Berra, played catcher for the New York Yankees. Here is one place where I differ from Bill Mitchell. Bill Mitchell used the future tense in almost every paragraph. And then he hooked up with MIT, whose motto you already recited here, which is the best way to predict the future is to invent that. I cringe every time I hear that. That it's so gendered and so technocentric, and it's just awful. And it saddened me from head to foot to see Bill fall under that spell.
But I guess it is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the spirit at MIT is to say, we can do it, right? We're the engineers, we can accomplish this, and therefore, the future is what we are going to invent, basically.
Whereas at Stanford, and another important piece in my background is that I somehow was a lucky dog and had a sabbatical at Xerox PARC in the 90s. Oh boy.
Nice. Yeah.
How many Cinderella moments can you have and have them still be Cinderella moments? Answer, a lot. And they were hanging around anthropologists, and this was inventing the field of science, technology, society. I met Wiebke Bijker, the famous Dutch philosopher of the social construction of technology, and there's no looking back. Technological determinism is forever in a yin-yang relationship with social constructionism. And the academic left goes to the opposite extreme. They think everything's a social construct. What, the sunrise? What, my lunch? No, but the point is that the social and technical keep reinventing one another. And we're back to this notion of technological frames, and now to the second heresy that I was going to mention. The other heresy in the 90s was the notion that machine cycles would be sacrificed in order to make computers more pleasant and usable. When the Mac came along in the 80s, it was a laughing stock, right? But by the 90s, the interaction design discipline had gotten off the ground. And I started reading human-computer interaction literature as early as the late 80s. One of my great heroes in that era was Brenda Laurel. What a rock star. And what happened is that it became just that. Usability became way more important than machine efficiency, especially from the standpoint of craft.
Fantastic. Another question from one of my MSc CMA students from Manar. He says, thank you for being here with us. I have two questions.
And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the person who's asking about biology. All I know about biology is that I am a small furry mammal. That's it.
Thank you.
Don't know much about biology.
This is from Manar, and she's asking, and also I know that a lot of the early work, and it's also on the cover of the book, the first book by Bill Mitchell and you, is a lot of work on shape grammars and on analyzing Palladian villas and other things. Obviously you were in an area with George Steiny there. She's asking, what is your perception of the role of technology in heritage architecture and conservation? And then what is your advice for the youth architects? That's a bit of a wide question, but if we can handle perhaps what you see as the role of technology in heritage conservation and digital cultural heritage is another area that we have.
I am not seeing these questions in the chat.
Sorry, this is a Q&A. So what I'm going to do is...
Oh, it's in the Q&A. I see.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Hello, Manar. George Steiny was mentioned, and I was very fortunate to have a couple of courses with George Steiny in Los Angeles way back in the beginning, and we sat around Autodesk stroking our chins, thinking how is this ever actionable? I never did figure that out. And then Bill, UCLA fell on strange times, and Bill got George Steiny out of there to MIT. They were good friends all along, and George Steiny is still there. I got the job at Michigan because I was the first person to come along who in their job talk did not talk about shape grammars.
Yeah. Could you comment on this idea of the role of technology in heritage architecture? Do you have any?
It's a good question. Again, not something I have much dealing with. I have some colleagues who've been off on an archaeological site in Turkey, and certainly they're using technology. And obviously there have been very good typological interpretations of architecture. I don't know about heritage, but even just traditional. There's another word that's heresy. To use the word traditional around an architecture school, oh boy. And yet, think what's been done, for example, by the whole revival of typological thinking in architecture about understanding the importance of everyday building types and form-based codes and housing transects and all that, even for existing cities. I don't know if I assume by heritage architecture you mean things that go further back and that have either that ought to be in a historic district and need preservation. I've never been around a school that had a degree in architectural preservation. The top one in America perennially is Columbia. I never set foot in the place. Not that I didn't want to. It's just it was.
No, we do have a postgraduate taught program in conservation, which is starting to kind of get traction, and they do really good work at the postgraduate level.
Early on, and this is another thing, what Mitchell did, the way he taught basic media skills was to have people make models of famous works in history.
Yes.
We learned all about Hadrian's Villa.
Yeah.
Right. I would wish for more architecture students to express some wonder for how the great things that have been done in other eras, rather than always trying to express the zeitgeist by, photoshopping the coolest, latest things and putting those on Instagram.
No worries.
As for the advice for the youth architects, I think I've already recited that, which is, if you don't want to be replaced by a machine, don't act like one. But then there's, I think, a second piece of advice, which is that don't do things for how they will look on Instagram.
Absolutely. I see a raised hand from Kamal Haddad. So Kamal, do you want to unmute and ask your question live?
Yes, sure. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Malcolm, for joining us here and sharing all of those knowledge. My question is kind of general. I want to hear your perspective on using recent technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and technological methods like the Internet of Things and their applications as a design tool in architecture and urban design. What do you think are the potentials? What's next?
Super question. And this is where Michigan is at. All monies, trends, hype, etc. around Michigan are on extended reality these days. I would separate that, however, from Internet of Things. Internet of Things, I think I looked into a lot, starting at Park in the 95. They were calling it ubiquitous computing back then, although that phrase got co-opted to mean a connection to one same internet from everywhere. That's not useful. Then it became pervasive computing, then it was tangible computing. That's an avenue I went down a lot. Of all the books, certainly the book that got me the most opportunity and dialogue was Digital Ground, which was basically a refutation 20 years ago now. It was a refutation of a thing. They used to have this word in the 90s. Tell me if this sounds so 90s. They had this word called cyberspace. Does anybody remember that word? Doesn't that sound so 90s? Digital Ground argued that rather the technology was coming out into the world. Little did we know that it would come out into the world into billions of smartphones, which of course have changed the world more than any other technology, with the possible exception of electricity. Steve Jobs wanted to put a dent in the universe. I think he did. I personally, as a small furry mammal, have been on my heels and horrified ever since smartphones came along. But they've changed everything. Just imagine trying to run a business. How about in Manila in the Philippines without smartphones? I don't think so.
Malcolm, can I?
Wait a minute, I got several threads here.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go for it.
Okay, so I say that to say I've thought a lot about Internet of Things, whereas my encounters with XR or back when in the day it was VR are in two stages. When I first got to Harvard, one of the very first things I did was I called up, or I guess I sent an old-fashioned print letter even to another one of the smartest people I ever met, a guy named Eric Lyons, who when I worked for him at Autodesk, he was a 24-year-old music school dropout. He was a serial entrepreneur who sold a couple of his companies to Microsoft, and he went off and spent the rest of his life teaching sailing in Tonga, I guess. I said, what shall I research? Here I'm at Harvard. Look, I'm at Harvard. And he in good California, wrote back 3 words: babe, cyberspace, babe. And John Walker, he was using Autodesk Millions to bankroll all kinds of crazies looking into VR. But it was so laggy. This is 30 years ago, right? Think how laggy it was. And it caused such simulation sickness. Then the person who was really researching it when it was becoming usable enough was Yehuda Kalei, who then at Berkeley, who his whole research team was all about Second Life. Remember Second Life? Is that still around? Is Second Life still around?
It is actually, yes.
The marvel of Second Life was the extent to which, given this liberating technology, people recreated the most banal effects of spatial environment, like minivans and parking. Why did Second Life have minivans and parking instead of having 4-dimensional click stuff where if you clicked on it, then shit would happen? Pardon my French. So then in the teens, I think people were so mesmerized by these smartphones, they forgot it. So then it's back. And now it's fast enough. I have students right in studio. They're under goggles in studio modeling. Live in studio time. And I can't say what that is. We have a university-wide initiative in extended reality, but unfortunately, the people who are running it, they're suits, they're boosterists, and I don't know where that will go. I personally applied for an internal fellowship in something here we have called the Institute for the Humanities. It's essentially a fellowship for faculty to take a sabbatical at home to investigate augmented reality, and I was turned down. In augmented reality, the cool stuff was coming out of Germany, right? There was remember Juno.io and Meta.io once iPads got good enough. This was maybe 2010, but Apple bought it all and mothballed it. That is now the Apple AR toolkit. It's complicated. I just came off on Monday. I was lurking on an urban technology conference in New York at Cornell Tech, and there were people building AR apps for public participation in community review of stuff. It's real. It exists.
So I'm going to use.
But my stock response is, who needs virtual reality when the real world's so fake?
Yeah.
And my second stock response is, well, maybe it's good that there's virtual reality, because there isn't enough direct experience to go around anymore. And if some people think it's cool to spend their life under goggles, good, there'll be fewer people in the parking lot at the trailhead.
Can I use this as a bit of a segue into your new masters that you're designing on urban technology? I know Chris was also interested in that.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about it.
And I think you want to hear a little bit more about Michigan.
And then, of course, I assume this is a new masters at Michigan.
People, your host and leader here is a Michigan doctoral alum. I think there are more alums. Tell me if I'm wrong. In a doctorate in architecture from Michigan than from any other place.
I mean, it was when we first started. I was the first year where it was actually changed from a D.Arch, which was meant to give a doctorate for professional practice. But they found out actually a lot of the graduates are going into academia, and they convened a panel from Pennsylvania, from Harvard, to take a look at reinventing it as a PhD. And we were the first class to do a PhD. When you used to apply for a PhD for an architecture, you were considered a UFO because it wasn't really the normal thing to do. People would stop at a master's. That was considered the terminal degree. So there was only a handful of universities that offered a PhD, and Michigan was obviously one of them. So yeah, you would see them. They run under the radar a little bit. As you said, they don't. I think it's Detroit, it's Michigan. They don't seek the limelight like somebody from different universities.
That's right.
Or they don't know how to promote themselves.
You worked with Harold Borkin.
I worked with Harold Borkin and Jim Turner, and behind the scenes, as you know, there is always this doctoral student who's a professional student who lives all their lives there and is a research associate all their life. And he became one of my best friends, Ted Hall. And Ted Hall is still at Michigan, actually.
Ted Hall is still around, and he ran the VR cave all along. He never stopped.
He's still there. He's running the VR cave, absolutely.
And you could go in there and pretend you were the quarterback in the Michigan football team.
Yeah.
All the fans cheering.
But you should ask him about ArchPlan and Gedit, some of the most amazing, CAD systems that were invented that never saw the day of light. They stayed in the lab.
There was this strange period where people thought that people in architecture schools could make their own CAD systems. Wasn't that?
We were absolutely. I wrote a shadow casting system on my own without a video card.
John Walker wrote AutoCAD single-handedly doing overlays of the bit vectors at the assembler level so that 640K, which is all you got of RAM on a IBM PC, would be enough to run something that everybody else knew you wouldn't make things on personal computers. Those were toys. But John Walker figured it out. Oh my God. All right, anyway.
So urban technology, what is that about?
Michigan.
Michigan.
When I got to Michigan, I did not, by then I'd lost touch with Autodesk. And rather than calling somebody up saying, hey, look, I'm at Michigan, what shall I research? They were asking me. They were saying, okay, so Malcolm, you're just new here. What do you think is the big research agenda for the decade ahead? And the first thing I did is I called up Bill, right? And we talked, and it's Detroit, right? And so I went back and said, well, look, it's going to be digital fabrication.
Right.
To which Harold responded with the same 3 words, to which he responded to most things, none one of which was babe. Harold never used the word babe, but he said, again, pardon the language, this lot of shit. Or
that sounds like Harold, my advisor.
Yes. Another 3 words. It's been done. But he was proven wrong by somebody named Monica Ponce de Leon. Monica Ponce de Leon came in as dean in 2008 and took the school to very high places and away from democracy. Monica gave us a taste of life after democracy and other attributes of that political world. But she took our school to high places, and she's a true visionary. I don't think she has just the gift, the gift to be a literary critic like Bill or anything, but Monica's amazing. And we did Digifab. Oh yes, we did.
Yeah.
And in particular, what she pushed was to educate the university central administration that not all research is declarative, that research doesn't always involve creating a decidable, reproducible formula first and then applying it after. Rather, there is process discovery.
Yeah. And
she called it research through making. And the projects that were, and it was an internal grant system. And the projects that came out of research through making had artisanal wonders, and it was great. That is the main thing that I've been at Michigan 20 years. It's very nice here. Ann Arbor's a lovely place to live. It's a little bit like Denmark, I think. It's not like Wales. I don't know, I've not been to Wales, but I cannot imagine a place in the British Isles that Ann Arbor is like. It's much more Germanic here. And it's mellow like Copenhagen, only small, like Aarhus. It's like Aarhus, Denmark.
Like Aarhus, I've been to Aarhus, yes.
Except no salty water. Okay, so and then Acadia, more Acadia papers have come out of Michigan than any other school over the last 10 years, I think. And our own Kathy Velikov also was Acadia president. And Wes McGee, who's Monica's guy from the beginning, is still there doing world-class research. Yeah, Digifab.
Fantastic.
Urban technology came from the next dean. Deans have incredible power in this university. They pretty much have all the power. Our university has around 20 deans. It's a huge university. Dean Jonathan Massey came to us from California College of the Arts, a place that also is quite good at Digifab. Really, they are. And also very good at Internet of Things, and also very good at tangible interface. Former Michigan Architecture Fellows Natalie Gatengo and Jason Kelly Johnson went off to CCA and showed the world. Jonathan Massey came back from Silicon Valley, a true believer in techno futures, and that the future is the smart city. We're back to your question, Chris. And that urban planners in particular need to catch up. And that there has to be a future in which government can do something, which of course, ever since Reagan and Thatcher, that's been quite in doubt. The government has been the problem rather than part of helping do something. But, you know, Washington just passed an infrastructure bill at last this very week.
Yep.
It's astonishing. So the urban technology program exists to educate a new generation of people to create a field that we cannot describe yet, that combines code and creativity and cities. And its stance is to push back against what some people call solutionism, right? Here, I will write that word in the chat. Solutionism is, we've got this technology, what's it for? Solutionism is, oh, the city is an engineering problem, we'll solve that for you. Solutionism is, those who own the technology own the conversation. Obviously, that has all kinds of horrors. Here in my messages today is a message from, we have something called a Center for Ethics, Society and Computing on campus, ESC, like Escape Key. And they have a guest about anti-racial AI. And you see this stuff too, right? I mean, it's probably the most famous book is a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, MATH. The urban technology degree exists in order to have creative, articulate people take the argument back to Silicon Valley that no, the city is not an engineering problem.
Right.
And to tell people like, how about Michael Batty, that no, cities cannot be managed through predictive scientific reduction. The urban technology degree exists because the field of interaction design has grown so far that it needs to diversify. It can't all be, I think the Chi conference gets 2,000 papers submitted each year, something like that. It's crazy.
Wow.
The urban technology degree exists because of the importance of hyper-local innovation. In London, I don't know if you ever come across Lucy Bullivant, but she's done a lot of very good work convening people working on hyper-local technologies. There was Usman Haq, for instance, and Adam Greenfield, aforementioned. Adam Greenfield's famous book, Against the Smart City, there's where that word against came from, came out in 2013. How far ahead of the game he was. Adam Greenfield's book called Radical Technologies has the most concise, articulate takedown of augmented reality that I ever witnessed. Just smoking. Adam Greenfield's a badass, right? He was a Green Beret or something like that. He's a punk rocker in Philly before that. I got to hang out in Philly with him once or twice. Pretty amazing. So we've been talking to people like that, or, you know, the hot writer and somebody I truly admire in urban computing these days in the States is Shannon Mattern out of New School in New York. More like that. So it's different. It's different from, for example, MIT has a very superb degree in urban data analytics. Sarah Williams, who was just on this thing in New York this week. Columbia's got something going. Bartlett. We'll see where it goes.
Fantastic. I just wondering if Chris has any follow-up questions on that, or is that okay? Just it's not an area obviously that is central to what I do, so I know very little about it obviously, but it seems to me that as you said, it is an expansion of going from interaction design, IoT, interactive architecture or responsive architecture, but into a world where let me divert a little bit. I want to ask you a different question that I was thinking about as you were talking about this urban technology masters. How do you, because a lot of the technology-based solutions for cities, Sorry about that. Sorry about that. It's a really dodgy mic here. The question I have for you regarding this is a lot of the solutions that I see regarding smart cities, etc., involves a lot of technology. And how do you reconcile that with a world where we live in a climate crisis? I mean, I just read recently that in order for us to equate the pollution emission of the production of an electric vehicle, we have to drive our petrol vehicles 70,000 miles because the production of an electric vehicle is so polluting. And it was a bit of a revelation because everybody is obviously promoting electric cars and all of that. So how do you reconcile technology with the need to really cut our emissions and reduce our carbon?
Always a good question. Everybody has to ask that question. First off, the degree is an undergraduate degree.
Oh, right. Okay.
We're of the opinion that by the time people are at the master's level, it's too late. We want people who are really of a new era, who are going to do things that we don't know what those are. More Carnegie Mellon, outgoing Carnegie Mellon president Jared Cohen would greet the freshmen that way. Welcome to Carnegie Mellon. 2/3 of you are going to do something that I can't tell you what that is. Okay, so it's an undergraduate degree, and yes, everybody would like to do something toward climate change other than just killing yourself, right? Save planet, kill self. My favorite writer for a long, long time, although she's getting a bit overexposed anymore on climate activism, is San Francisco-based Rebecca Solnit. Oh yeah. Rebecca says, hope is something that you do. Rebecca Solnit is a writer's writer. She writes better than Bill Mitchell. Hope is something that you do. Hope arises in community, all that stuff. I tried touching on that in my new book, the microgrid book, but the microgrid book disappeared into the pandemic, and it's not my area. Energy is not my area, and it was not taken seriously. And it's like that book doesn't even exist. I think if you get onto Google Scholar, the craft book has maybe 1,000 citations, and the microgrid book has maybe like 3 citations. The technology is essential. One person besides Bill Mitchell, who was always pretty good with the future tense, Bruce Sterling, the sci-fi writer, who was an Austin guy. My wife's from Austin. He would always say, the future is going to weird you out. For example, imagine artificial food, right? For example, imagine not wearable computing, but implants. The future is going to weird you out. The future started weird me out when Steve Jobs created these things that everybody walks around holding all the time instead of enjoying the world. I stop people on the street, say, it's such a beautiful day. It's too nice of a day for those things, don't you think? The future without that is just going to be grim, right? Sterling offered the distinction between bright green and dark green. Dark green is where everybody just, starts freezing and starving like monks again, right? And are you an environmentalist or do you have children? So in the dark green future, no, you don't have children. In the bright green future, your children are Borgs, said the futurists. I don't know. I'm not a futurist. I'm a horseshoe crab. So with respect to urban technology, a very fancy minister from Singapore who was on this conference on Monday put it, I think, very, very well. He said this: having urban technology lets you have a better macro picture of what's going on in your domain. And that buys you time to react.
Right.
Because there will never be another new normal, said the fancy Singapore futurist. There's only never normal from here on out. And reaction time is everything. And better urban technologies improve reaction times. So there's a take on it.
Malcolm,
but for a really good take, I should let me Anthony Townsend, Bill Mitchell's very last doctoral student, Anthony Townsend, has the most impressive futures scan out of Cornell. Let me drop that in the chat, and then I'll stop dropping things in the chat or mentioning other people who are also Bill Mitchell people. Pardon me, I'm looking at this other screen and not at the camera.
No worries.
Zoom etiquette, right? Here.
Great, thank you.
Anthony Townsend does not communicate doubt. He's a confident guy.
Great, Malcolm. I wanna thank you for this really amazing. It's not a talk; it's an interview, which is really. I'm a true believer now, because I don't think we would have touched on so many topics if it was a pre-prepared, canned, lecture. So I'm a true believer in that format, and I think I will try to follow that in the future. But really, thank you for a very fantastic, survey of everything you've been doing, everything that you will be doing in the future. I really look forward to seeing what you are going to be doing at Michigan, and for reminding me of how good work was being done at Michigan. I really appreciated that.
Well, thank you, but I'm going to just wander off into the woods. I hope we were able to say enough about how research agendas rise and fall. Please understand that each organization, each discipline is disposed to notice this and not that, right? Just imparting the famous anecdote is that in the discovery of plastics, or bakelite is the material that came before plastics, the people who figured it out were not the chemists who knew that you arrived at new materials by running chemical reactions and solvents and so on. They were people from outside that world altogether. And this is what happened with interaction design. The interaction design community did not come out of straight up computer scientists. And it seems to be what's happening with urban technology. It's our hope here that the urban technology community does not arise out of the people who are out there to Uberify everything.
Yeah.
And none of this touches hardly at all on non-manifold topologies.
No, it's
sorry
fine.
about that. But,
I'm glad it doesn't.
But the craft of giving form of things is a part of each of these, right? It's important to have work that just feels good to work on.
No, absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you for the audience for their questions. Really kind of, it really improved the conversation and allowed us to touch on many subjects.
Yes, thank you. We couldn't have done it without your questions. I'm sorry if I missed some or took them someplace else than you wanted.
We'll bring you in next time for them.
So sometime when we have carbonless airplanes, right?
Absolutely.
Then I want to encounter the Welsh language firsthand.
Me too, as well.
Oh, wow.
I've been here 13 years. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for your attention.
Bye-bye.